Hello, learners. Welcome to this lesson concerning science fiction. We talked in the last lesson about the novel. We talked about the novel The Rapture. In the last lesson, we talked about the novel Rapture and we discussed some of the characters and we talked about how science fiction holds issues of climate change. So, in that novel, The Rapture, there is a issue about the climate changing. There is global warming and many of the themes that are there in climate fiction. So we discussed that earlier. New York 2140 by Kim Stanley Robinson. Robinson explores the economic and social adaptations required to live in such a world, critiquing capitalism and advocating for systemic change. So we are talking about climate in altered worlds, and we are talking about capitalism, which has been mentioned by many philosophers as the source of climate change. And this novel also advocates systemic change. This novel advocates systemic change. Another novel is The Parable of the Sower by Octavia Butler. Butler's story of a young girl in a climate-ravaged, economically polarized America explores issues of resource scarcity, community resilience, and the importance of adaptability. So, one of the issues that can, one of the issues is climate, is resource depletion. Life becomes very hard in such areas. So one of the resolutions for this is trying to adapt to the changing climate, which can be very challenging. But in some ways, it's like conserving the water resources or the natural resources. So in today's world, we are also learning those lessons of adaptation because we know that we will be running out of non-renewable energy resources like oil and coal. So there are science communities, scientists working on trying to make energy from renewable resources. So science fiction deals with a lot of these things and about adaptation too. Imagining alternative futures, utopian and dystopian approaches. Dystopian futures. Dystopian worlds are often marred by pollution, authoritarian regimes, and social collapse, underscoring the need for immediate action. And utopian narratives are, or utopian futures are about providing a blueprint for positive change, for inspiring readers to envision and work towards a better future. So, both these kind of futures are aimed towards showing us what climate change is doing, and one offers resolution while the other gives warning and tells us of the urgency of the need for action. And all public opinion and climate activism is formed because of the ideas conveyed through books and movies, especially science fiction storytelling. Science fiction speculative storytelling influences policymakers and environmental advocates. So it is the story, the entertainment, and the lesson in it, the eye-opening facts, which influence policymakers and environmental advocates to take action. Sometimes there are local communities where there may be water depletion, or there may be a loss of biodiversity, or they may be some kind of pest that is uh, eating their crops because of the change of the climate. So there are times when they do not know how to act, and things like this create displacement and misery. So such movies or such books, science fiction books, they show the way forward. They give ideas and they tell the science why it has happened. So instead of going into superstitions and uh, believing folk tales about things that it may be it may be connected with past sins and things like that, they learn the science behind it and accordingly learn to take action. So we know about the deserts, how they are uh, depleted of water sources. So the people there know through environmentalist efforts, through the effort of scientists, they know which plants will survive, which crop will survive. So this is a way of adaptation, and this has an impact on policy and cultural perspectives. Climate fiction, for example, has been recognized by environmental think tanks and is sometimes used in academic and policy circles to illustrate potential outcomes and ethical considerations. So, so people come to know what the outcomes are and what are the ethical considerations that should be taken into action, or which should be translated into action. And as Ernest tells us in Deep Ecology, that the ethical considerations are that not to think of humans alone, but to think of the entire non-human world too. So when we start to um, use chemicals and pesticides, we are only thinking of saving our crop, but we're not thinking of the other world there. Much of it is supportive for our crops. So we are breaking down this chain, this link of support from the environment. We are breaking our connection with the environment. So uh, such things, such ideas, when they come through science fiction, they influence policy. They government policies are influenced, and they help in making certain laws. So by placing readers in possible futures, science fiction promotes an ethical imperative to act on climate issues before they become irreversible. So the warning comes from science fiction to take action, to make policies, uh, so before the future as it is seen, to save oneself from that future, to save the people of the earth from that future, action should be taken now. So science fiction is a warning as well as a source of information. It is an incentive to take action. Science fiction is also a tool for empathy and change. Empathy for future generations. So there was a paragraph that I read out just in the previous lesson from the Rapture, and there is the concern for future generations. The paragraph says that there was a time when one could think of children and grandchildren and think of adding to the gene pool, have a pleasant image of the future, but it is not so today. So what do we feel when we see that the ocean and the air and water are polluted? Science fiction makes us aware that we may be spoiling the future for coming generations. So by making climate change personal and immediate, it can inspire a sense of responsibility in readers to address the issue. So when we see that garbage is being thrown into the waters, the ocean is being poisoned, the fish are dying, and we mentioned in a previous lesson also certain species will become extinct. And when science fiction deals with these things, it makes us reflect that the coming generations might not be able to see certain species of birds and animals, or even plants. Their world might be a kind of desert, as predicted by another author, and by Margaret Atwood in her essay in the Time Capsule. So she talks about a world that is nothing but desert. And then there's a time when people start to see the desert as a symbol of zero, and the zero starts to become sacred. It becomes a part of the culture. So such images are quite terrifying, and one would not want that uh, emptiness to come to the future generations. So science fiction brings about engagement and activism. Books, films, and shows often leave audiences with a call to action, whether explicit or implicit, urging them to consider a role in shaping a sustainable future. Like the film Snowpiercer, what happens at the end of the film? Are they able to reverse the ice age? The answer is no. But they try to adapt to things. They try to find some ways of living in that ice. They have to adapt to it. If they do not try to adapt, then the last of the human race will be finished. So before things become so irreversible, it is better to take action. This is the message of science fiction. Science fiction has a rich historical background, uh, and in addressing the concept of climate changes, climate futures, along with scientific knowledge, social anxieties, and technological advancements. The historical background of science fiction in this context illuminates how the genre has shifted from tales of alien worlds and futuristic technologies to narratives that warn about Earth's climate, human survival, and the impact of ecological degradation. So, we already had an idea of this history at the back, and we already know that Ursula Le Guin and uh, they are and other such authors, for example H.G. Wells, they were talking about technology and scientific progress and advancements in their works, and their novels were futuristic, and many of the things that they talked about are true today. So even in that sense, Isaac Asimov also, they were predicting the future. But today, along with that, science fiction has taken upon it the climate issues and the idea of human survival in a climate change world, in a dystopian world, and the extent of ecological degradation. Uh, so it's climate fiction that's a part of science fiction, and it informs public, it inspires public, it helps us to take action for a sustainable future. So as we talk about the early foundations or the beginnings of science fiction and environmentalism, we can say that it began in the 18th and 19th centuries with writers like Mary Shelley, H.G. Wells, and Jules Verne. We know about Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. It was always human beings trying to overpower nature in some way, and in this also in Frankenstein, the attempt is to uh, bring to life a dead man. So it is like fundamentally uh, technology and technological advances and scientific experiments are such that they can dare to do things that have never been thought before. So it is both a work of science, this science fiction, this book, but it also belongs to the gothic genre because it's horror, and so the stories of scientific progress and the unknown world out there, the unknown universe, all these things were setting the ground for future science fiction, and gradually it would involve itself with climate disaster, which is becoming more and more frequent in the 21st century. So Jules Verne's novels like 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea hinted at ecological destruction, but they did not center environmental degradation as a primary theme. So this is a novel that is very popular among young people, and there is a hint there, though it does not focus on that. It hints at ecological destruction, and it talks about the underwater world. So we still have science, and it talks about that destruction, but its primary goal is not to talk about environmental degradation. And with the coming of the Industrial Revolution, I suppose a whole canvas, a whole Tinder's box was opened, a whole Pandora's box was opened for science fiction writers as they saw the world of nature being destroyed by people obsessed with technology and capital. So it transforms societies with pollution and industrial waste and social inequality. So all these things became visible, and we can see that during the Victorian era, even poetry and literature reflected it. And then we see that it went to other forms of other genres too. So, so early science fiction reflected the unease and the surrounding rapid industrialization and humanity's ability to harness nature without considering the consequences. So this attempt at conquering nature, dominating nature, harnessing nature, this idea was very important, and that's why it was always human centered, and nature was always there to be conquered, to be fought, to be battled against. Whether it was a mountain or whether it was a fish or whether it was a horse, it had to be broken in. So this was supposed to be a mark of bravery, courage, industriousness. So even if we go back to the time when America was forming by settlers, and when they arrived to this new land, nature was there at their mercy. The tribes were at the mercy of the settlers, the white man, and the nature was also at their mercy, because they were asked to ride, and the longer distance that they rode, that distance of land became theirs. So they were like masters, and the tribal people were slaves, and the land was also there at their service. So they could cut down trees, cut down forests, and use the rich resources to build a new life in the new land. Many of these people who first came to America or who first settled in Australia were people who had been outcast from society. So they were badly in need of a new beginning, a new land. So they established a new land, new settlements, new societies, and they found that these lands were very rich, and they harnessed nature without considering the consequences, and they killed the natives who had lived in harmony with nature. So early science fiction reflected this outright destruction of nature and industrialization, and they never considered the consequences of it. So some of the examples are H.G. Wells' The War of the Worlds and The Time Machine. So we already know about The Time Machine. I did mention it earlier, that it shows some anxiety about these climate-laden, climate change, future worlds which were far ahead in technological progress, and in the same way, the War of the Worlds, how society becomes split between the haves and the have-nots because of this extreme obsession with technology and wealth and power. So these novels question the technological progress and uh, and see or portray how nature is seen as a potential threat, potential resource which is used to further their dreams and their ambitions. Then we reach the mid 20th century. This was the time of the post World Wars. Um, the there was a time of the rise of environmental consciousness. There was the post World War II anxiety. After World War II, science began reflecting on the existential threats posed by nuclear technology, environmental degradation, and the potential for ecological collapse. So we can see that uh, it was only in the 80s that uh, climate fiction made its presence, but science fiction was talking about these existential threats, and even a novel by Ernest Hemingway, belonged to the 20th century. He talks about this existential threat of war and how the impact of war on the environment, and that is made very symbolic in his novel, in his war novel, A Farewell to Arms. So we can see that when these images of war, these stark images of suffering, or death of soldiers, bombings, when these things were reflected in all other genres of literature, science fiction was also impacted by them, and it talked about uh, the potential for ecological collapse. And books and films began to explore themes of post apocalyptic worlds, pollution, and resource depletion. So, after the World War II, these things were suffered, the economies suffered, there was a loss of lives, environments were ruined, uh, people were homeless, there was so much of poverty in the world. So literature reflected on the themes of the post apocalyptic world, and science fiction was no exception. And during the Cold War era, a new wave of science fiction explored themes of human extinction and nuclear winter. So we can see that science fiction takes on itself current events, current happenings, current state of world politics, or current global state of the economy, and all those things, when it is considering the way the world is changing, and it is uh, and it thus deals with uh, the climate fatalities also. So during the Cold War, science fiction explored themes of human extinction and nuclear winter. So there was a fear that Russia might come up with some nuclear power that might bring winter to the entire globe. So, for example, Neville Shoots on the Beach and John Wyndham's The Day of the Triffids. These are important books that express the anxiety and insecurities of that era. These are important science fiction books, and I recommend that you read these books. In these books, the earth was devastated by human actions, raising questions about the consequences of technological power and advancement. So we can see that science fiction deals with scientific progress and scientific experiments, and uh, dabbling with new eras, new universes, but it also deals with climate issues, and also with the consequences of slavery to technological power, or a overindulgence to technical power. Technological prosperity does not necessarily ensure human happiness. So, in the 90s, 60s, and the 70s, there was the emergence of the eco science fiction, Silent Spring, and the environmental movement. Rachel Carson's book 1962, Silent Spring, marked a pivotal moment, sparking the modern environmental movement by exposing the danger of pesticides. This shifted the public consciousness, and science fiction began addressing themes of pollution, deforestation, and ecological collapse. Dystopian and environmental science fiction. So, there are some very important books. They are supposed to be classics in the science fiction genre. So, let's consider them. So, the genre started addressing environmental themes directly. Frank Herbert's Dune, which examines resource scarcity and ecological exploitation on a desert planet. Dune's portrayal of a planet-wide struggle for water mirrors Earth's own resource dilemmas and ecologic imbalances. And interestingly enough, Dune has been transferred into various online platforms. For example, there are games also which are on the same storyline, the same level as Dune. So Dune has been so popular that it has been turned into games too, along with movies and other online platforms. There are some ecological disaster films, and they are what influence literature. They are how science and climate influence literature. The 1970s saw a rise in eco-science fiction. So, Soylent Green, 1973, is set in an overpopulated, polluted future where food shortages drive humanity to desperate measures. So we can see the food and water and air, they are basic needs for human beings to survive, and when they are not available, then there is a desperate rush to get them, and this novel talks about the desperate drive to survive in a climate changed world. Harry Harrison's Make Room, 1966. It is a very interesting and a very meaningful title. Tackles overpopulation and resource scarcity, creating a dystopian world that reflects growing environmental concerns of the era. So we can see as early as 1966, there was a growing insecurity about the population of the world which was growing, and the gradual resource scarcity which was coming in. And then we know that how that is being tackled by the use of pesticides. The idea of using pesticides is often discussed in social circles. So the talk is always that with the booming human population, other measures, natural measures would not work. That's why pesticides are essential. So this is an idea for reflection. Is it not possible that one can take safe measures and keep humanity safe and keep humanity fed? So let us stop here. I hope you learned something about the beginnings of climate fiction. We'll meet again in the next lesson. Thank you.